Every generation is like a man climbing up a hill. The higher the hill he advances, the clearer his perspective on the past. You have to get away from it. You have to get a perspective on it. You have to get to the documents. You have to get as best you can, always imperfectly. You have to get to what passes for the truth.
We, the people, leave a trail of evidence, rich in substance and story. And when you go to the archives across our Commonwealth, when you find those words, pictures, and sounds, the stories of our past, present, and future begin to come clearly into focus. Many of the riches of the treasured historical legacy of Kentucky are preserved by more than 300 archives, records, and manuscript repositories across the Commonwealth, serving hundreds of thousands of researchers annually. The story of Kentucky may be found in those archives that are all across the state, from Paducah to Pikeville, in records, documents, photographs, moving images, sound recordings, and computer files. The Kentucky State Historical Records Advisory Board helps these institutions by providing guidance, leadership, and assistance that will preserve and make accessible these important documents from past generations. Exploring Kentucky's archives brings our documentary heritage to life. As Director of Archives at the University of Kentucky Library's Special Collections and Digital Programs Division, Lisa Carter has an extensive record of accomplishment with digital and audiovisual archives projects, most notably receiving a National Historical Publications and Records Commission Archival Research Fellowship for her work in leading the digitization effort for the television program archives of Kentucky Educational Television.
I do believe that history helps us learn about ourselves, who we are today, where we came from, and then what kind of choices we might make in the future, and how we might better build on the experience and activities of the people who came before us, and also leave a legacy for the people who come after us. Some people feel that losing that connection with the touching and feeling and smelling of the original resource is a major loss. But as archivists, what we try to do is we provide a digital surrogate out to the world on the internet. And what we're hoping is that that will encourage people to come in and actually use the materials. And so it's our job to preserve the original so that it can be accessed, provide a surrogate out to the broader public so that people who don't want to touch it can access it anyway, but then also to encourage people to come in and actually see the materials, look at them, feel them. I think in some cases, especially with something like a photographic negative or a handwritten letter on yellowing paper, it's very hard to capture that sense, that feeling digitally. But what the digital world does is it kind of it introduces you, it gets you going, it gets you started and gets you thinking about that document. And then if you really need to see the original or the 3D item, then you can come in to a library or an archive and see it under appropriate conditions, under conditions that are created to secure that document effectively, to preserve that document in the best way. In some cases, we'll encapsulate a letter, so we'll put it in plastic so that people can't get fingerprints all over it, or so that it doesn't get dusty, or so that it doesn't continue to deteriorate. And those are some of the ways we can save the actual item. But some materials won't last. For example, videotapes have a very short lifespan, and they will deteriorate. There's just nothing we can do about that. So to reformat them in another format, like a digital format, enables the information to go on past the life of the videotape. One of the really exciting things that's changing in the way that we're learning and in the way students are learning is that they are drawing from resources all over the internet, all over the world, all over television, radio, and they're putting it together to create a new creative object or a new creative message out to the world. And what I want to do as an archivist is provide access to the historic documentation, the letters, the photographs, the videotapes, the film, that students, whether they're in grade school or high school or college, that they can pull these things together and build their own creative resources based on what they've learned from the past, from their ancestors, from the people who came before them. So for example, when filmmakers create a film like Bobby, they'll take archival footage and photographs of Bobby Kennedy, and they'll add it into their film that has today's stars in it, so Emilio Estevez, and they will juxtapose archival footage of Bobby Kennedy and today's footage that they just captured of Emilio Estevez as a character. And they will build a new interpretation of what Kennedy meant to the community, to the world at the time. And becoming an archivist is really a dynamic, exciting profession in the future, because it's about collecting the past and documents in the past. And now that there's so much widespread information technology everywhere, people will want more of this stuff. They want more historic documents, historic photographs. And I think that because of the internet, we're going to see an explosion in the sorts of people who want to organize materials, organize information. And I do think it'll be a hot career in the future. I think it's a very potentially exciting future profession. I think the challenge is that people have a conceived notion of what it means to be an archivist or a librarian. And you can see this in movies. Quite often at professional conferences, we get together and we watch clips from movies that have archivists or librarians in them, and they've got their glasses on and the buns in their hair, and they go to this dark, scary, dusty room. But what we're finding is that archives aren't like that at all. Today, more archivists are using computers in ways that are cutting edge and unique. We're collaborating with computer scientists and people who are on the cutting edge of information technology. They're creating tools that make information more accessible and enable people to find things in ways that are much more intuitive than card catalogs or even Boolean searching is. So librarians and archivists are finding new ways to get people to the information. And the people who created Google, the people who create sources on the Internet Movie Database, those people have the mind of an archivist and a librarian. They're doing the same kinds of work. And so they may not be called archivists, but they're doing very similar work. And I think that work is going to be a hot area to be in. Whether you call it an archivist or not is really incidental. It's an opportunity to get more information out to more people and allow them to be creative, to learn, and to do research in ways that they never could before.
Expert professional genealogical researcher Roger Futrell brings years of experience in assisting clients from around the country who are researching family history, genealogy, personal medical history, or local history. Much of his research involves locating materials in government records, such as birth and death certificates, deeds, wills, and marriage records. These records, where individual actions or events are recorded as transactions with government offices, are often the only written record many people leave behind.
For me, genealogy serves a purpose in that it brings a person to life. It puts flesh on the bone. To know that a person's name, their date of birth, their date of death, to me is irrelevant. I mean, it just doesn't do much for me. But if you find out what happened between that person's date of birth and their death, then you know who that person was, what they were about, what they contributed to society, what their problems were. You look at both the negative and the positive in a person's life and try to recreate a story of that person's life. These birth and death indexes were maintained by the Commonwealth of Kentucky from 1911 through 1969 in hard form like I have in front of me, and they're separated by birth and then by death. The birth information lists those who were adopted in Kentucky as under their original birth name prior to their adoption having been processed. In addition, it contains the births of every other individual who was born in Kentucky between 1911 and 1969. So that information is readily available to anyone, the public. These records have been microfilmed. They're readily available nationwide through the Latter-day Saint Church. Those individual records are just a godsend to a genealogist. I mean, then from 1970 forward, that information is put together on microfiche and now has been digitized and is available online. Greg and I had known each other for years and at one point had worked together. And Greg came to me on one occasion and indicated that he would like to find his birth parents, that he was adopted, he would like to find his birth parents. As a genealogist, we had bare bones facts. As I said, the birth mother would not tell Greg who his birth father was. So we relied on the non-identifying information that was supplied by Catholic Charities of Louisville, which had handled his placement and his adoption. The non-identifying information is non-specific, but it did tell us some real key facts. It told us that, first of all, the birth father was of Lebanese heritage, that he was Roman Catholic, that he was 28 years old at the time this child was conceived, that he was a salesman for a major business machine corporation at the time, had previously owned his own business, had previously been married, had a child with that marriage. So knowing those facts, I compiled a listing of all known Lebanese surnames in the Louisville area. Then began just a process of elimination, just eliminating family after family of people who did not meet this criteria. But the crowning moment of the search was that the non-identifying information said that the birth father's dad had died prior to Greg's birth while in heart surgery. And heart surgery prior to 1967 when he was born was a rare entity. That was not like today. So I went into the Lebanese community and asked some questions. You know, do you recall people who died of heart surgery back in the 50s or 60s? And we got information there. And once I suspicioned it was the Karam family, then I started going through old Louisville city directories and looking for a Karam who worked for a business machine corporation, a Karam who had owned his own business between age 21 and age 28, roughly, and came up with the birth father's name this way. Then the thing that tied it all together was the obituary of the birth father's father, who had died, the obituary said, during heart surgery in Philadelphia. So this tied the entire thing together, and the obituary listed the names of the grandfather's children. The non-identifying information had said the birth father was one of 3 brothers. The obituary confirmed that. So the obituary tied everything together in a neat package.
The moment I first met my father, I was in Starbucks. I contacted him on the phone and we decided to meet at a Starbucks in Louisville, Kentucky. And it was really funny because I was there and I was waiting, I'm kind of looking around, trying to figure out, what this guy looks like. Is he going to be tall like me? Is he going to be, he's going to have my nose? Poor guy, that kind of thing. And I was waiting. I thought, I got to go to the bathroom. So I went to the bathroom, and on the way out, I opened the door up, and there was a guy standing there. He's looked at me, and I looked at him, and I kind of looked. I said, "Mr. Karam?" And he said, "Yes." And he looked at me for a second. And he looked me up and down, and he said, "Yeah, you're Karam."
So often, when we come up with our own families that are biological, we're so used to seeing who we are. We see who we are in the faces of our family, and knowing Greg and seeing how he has transformed himself and gained all this confidence, it's just putting the pieces of the puzzle together where he learns of his heritage, he learns where he comes from, and the sense of pride that he feels and the way he walks. It is just amazing how much, and Roger actually predicted this because he's had so many experiences in helping people obtain the gift of learning about their history. And I think it's a blessing that when you have the opportunities through someone who is a genealogist to be able to find your heritage and find your roots. So many people do not have those opportunities to be able to find out who they are and where they came from. And it's amazing to see him transform into the man that he has become through being confident, and he's more energetic, and he has such pride. and it's just amazing to see the transformation.
Basically, it validated everything that my adoptive father and mother have told me through the years. It has validated everything.
There's no doubt that adoption search, particularly one that's positive, has social value. I think though even one that is negative may have social value. I think we all need to find our roots, to go back to who we really are from a DNA standpoint, because DNA carries genetics that make us what we are.
Deirdre Skaggs, University Archivist at the University of Kentucky, previously managed a grant project which helped preserve and make accessible the John C. Wyatt Lexington Herald Leader Collection, an important collection of photographs that document life in central Kentucky for much of the 20th century. The project was funded by the National Historical Publications and Records Commission and supported by the Kentucky State Historical Records Advisory Board.
So the Lexington Herald Leader was donating their photo morgue to the University of Kentucky, and it's a collection of about 1.5 million items. The Herald Leader photographers and staff kept published newspaper photographs and unpublished photographs along with their associated newspaper clippings, and they kept them all in files, and they stored them in one of their storage rooms. I'm sure it moved many times at the Lexington Herald Leader building. So it just seemed like a really amazing opportunity to work with a collection that the general public had probably never even seen. The first day that I started the job, it was a little bit daunting. You know, how do you go about processing a collection that's so big that you can't really even picture how big it is? That I had to examine the negatives where they were, which was at the Lexington Herald Leader. I had to have them moved from the Lexington Herald Leader to a storage room that we had built specifically for this collection. That was also part of the grant. And I had to assemble a team of students who were going to do most of the physical work on the collection, and then I also had to come up with a plan for the entire processing of the collection. And this is pretty representative of how each negative was stored, and I would just flip through boxes and boxes of these. There were filing cabinets, about 11 to 13 filing cabinets full, and then hundreds of boxes like this. And the negatives would be inside, and then, as I said before, there's typically a newspaper clipping, which adds a lot of great context. But they're all in here together, and so what the students had to do, and are still doing, is to separate the negatives from this physical enclosure and put them in new archival enclosures. And then they do database records for each one so that anyone could search, a patron could come in and search, and then now they could search through the Kentucky Anna Virtual Library as well, and on an item level find an image that they may be interested in. One of the goals of the grant was to make this project a model that other institutions could follow if they were dealing with a large collection like the Lexington Herald Leader collection. And so I would try and find images that would relate to people outside of Kentucky but also relate to people in Kentucky. And so some of the images that are still among my favorites are the moonshine raids that happened all the time. There's some very eerie photographs of John F. Kennedy while he was campaigning and he's driving through Lexington in his convertible. When Martin Luther King spoke in Frankfurt, those images have always stuck out. And then there were other ones that I looked for fun, celebrities that I could find when they visited Lexington. This evidence that's left behind, whether it be photographs, newspaper photographs or amateur photographs or diaries or ledger books even, or financial documents, that this evidence is part of all of our collective memory and part of what has made us who we are today in one way or another. Taking this project to serve as a model for other institutions is starting to work, and as far as the collection itself goes, we didn't want to publicize it too much during the beginning because it's hard to process a collection and then also make it completely accessible to the public at the same time. And so now that this initial stage is completed, I think it'll be a great time to really open it up even more to the public.
A lifelong researcher in Kentucky history, Dr. James Klotter, Kentucky State historian and professor of history at Georgetown College, has relied on archival and manuscript materials for his numerous books, articles, and lectures on Kentucky history. Klotter is keenly aware that without archival and manuscript repositories, much of the research that he and other scholars have carried out would not have been possible, and Kentuckians would have a much more limited perspective of the growth and development of Kentucky.
There's nothing like going to the original sources. When you get a letter in your hand, it means so many things. First of all, you know that the person who wrote that, actually touched that same letter. If you're reading a letter of Henry Clay in his tiny handwriting, you know that he wrote those words on that letter. You can see on it things that tell us a lot. Congressmen used to get letters sent free through the mail, so they write on the top, free, and you can see that on the outside of the envelope. You can see sometimes the tear stains on a letter. When somebody's writing a sad letter about a death in the family, you can literally see the tears on those letters. It's blotted the ink. It makes the people of the past real. It makes them relevant. And when you do that, you study these people and you begin to feel a kinship with them. And you're reading their mail, really. And you're reading through their diaries and their innermost thoughts. And you almost feel like they're looking over your shoulder as you're doing that, saying, "What do you think about me?" And you know them in a sense better than they know themselves because you're reading what other people say about them too. And when I do research, I always think of the quote of Barbara Tuchman. She said, "Research is endlessly seductive. Writing is hard work, but," she said, "it is an act of creation. It is a moment on Olympus." And to me, that's really what it's all about. Research is fun, and then writing it so other people can share in that fun and can learn from it and can find out that the story is something that really affects them now. It's not all about the past, it's about the future. And this all came alive to me when I was working on a book on the Breckinridges, and in there, Robert Breckinridge, a Unionist, had two sons who were fighting for the Confederacy against his cause. And during the war, he called out for the death of traitors. He said, "The only imperishable cement for free institutions is the blood of traitors." And his daughter-in-law, who was married to a Confederate soldier, couldn't forgive him for that, so she would not let him see his grandchild during the Civil War. After the war was over, she still would not relent, and a second child was born, and he still could not see that grandchild. And then a third grandchild was born. And of all these hundreds of letters, thousands of letters that I read about Robert Breckinridge, on one of them was written on the back something I had never seen before, the word important, underlined. And you open up that letter and you read it, and in there it's his daughter-in-law writing to him and saying, "You can come and see your grandchildren now." The three grandchildren he'd never seen before for the first time, and you can see how important that was to that grandfather. One thing that I think people sometimes don't think about is that we're all historians. In history, you don't have to have a chemistry lab to work. You just have to have an inquiring mind. And people sometimes feel like they can't go into a research place. It's somewhere else, something sacrosanct or something almost out of their field, but it's not. Really history is something that belongs to everybody, and everybody can enjoy it. And the more people do so, I think the more they find they will enjoy it. And so I think people should just simply go out and do the research themselves, and I think they'll find that it's a whole different world out there. I realize that there's certain things that are endless, that go on from century to century, generation to generation, that we're not as different sometimes as we think we are from people of the past. I really get a sense of perspective on things. I read about how in frontier times you had all these people speaking all these different languages. You had Germans here, you had Spanish here, you had Native Americans here, you had African Americans here, you had French, all in Kentucky, all speaking these different languages. And now we have a multicultural society, and that things are not that different as we sometimes think they are over time. So those are the kinds of things that really I get from history. Is that it gives me a much fuller appreciation of the world I live in and how we operate and why it operates, but also a much more sense of enjoyment, because I think in studying history, I know the world around me better.
Without records, whether written, visual, moving, audio, or electronic, to trace our past and to find the roads we have traveled. We could not find our way toward our future or look back to our past. We could not find our way without archives. Archival and manuscript repositories collect, preserve, and make accessible records across the Commonwealth, from east to west and north to south, the gift from earlier generations. They are public, private, academic, religious, and business. They hold unique resources, beckoning us back to the trail to find who we are and where we have been. Visit and support our archives. Discover Kentucky.
When I go out and anytime I meet someone new and they ask me what I do, and if I say I'm an archivist, I found that still most people don't really understand what I do on a daily basis, and they just immediately assume that it's old stuff, which it is, but I go on to explain to them that what excites me about working in archives is not only the preservation of history and making sure that it's there for future generations, but it's about making it accessible to people now.
I know this is going to sound trite, but to me we learn about why we are the way we are. I know, like in my own life, I can go back and look at ancestors, like in grandparents, and I know where I got certain traits. I know where I got certain idiosyncrasies. I see traits in my son that have been passed on from both families. I think it lets us know who we are, and as a result helps us know what direction we want to go. I mean, I think it helps in acceptance of who we are and why we are.
And it gives us that kind of sense of perspective that we can put ourselves in the shoes of other people. We can see things through their eyes, and we can learn from them, and it makes us much better as a people and much better as a nation.
Archivists provide the resources, they provide the underlying structure and resources for creation to happen. And actually that's what I like about archives, is that it's not about me being creative, it's about enabling other people to be creative.
You're preserving something that people can take pride in, something that people can be rooted in. And that's one of the problems we face in modern society right now, is that such a large portion of our population is rootless. Well, these things are fertile soil in which roots can be planted, in which individuals can feel a part, not only of the physical community, but a part of the social and political, economic development of a community.
There's a place in our hearts where passion lies, a place where our dead and our feeble rise. There's a place where a seed can grow, and all you can do, find your way back, wind your way back, find your way back home, sweet. Find your way back, wind your way back, find your way back.